Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up important articles of the day from the newspaper and discuss them in detail as per the demands of Civil Services exam. Articles covered today are displayed on your screen and their notes in PDF and Word format are provided in the description box down below. Without further ado, let us begin.
Now starting off with the first article of the day, which appeared on page 8 of today's Hindu newspaper. In this article, the Hindu reports that 8 alleged militant supporters, they were arrested and arms were recovered from them near the line of control in the Jammu and Kashmir Union Territory. Now the Jammu and Kashmir police, they categorize anyone who support militants as an overground worker. These workers, they are responsible for providing safe houses, passages, information, or they act as messengers for supporting militant activities. Now, any militant who are without weapon are categorized as an overground worker. Now, this topic is important from GS Paper 3 perspective, as it highlights the role of external state and non-state actors in creating challenges to internal security. And these overground workers, they act as non-state actors. Further, this topic was asked in the mains of the year 2019, where a question appeared on Jamaat-e-Islami and its role as overground workers for assisting terrorist organizations in state of Jammu and Kashmir. Hence, in the scope of our today's discussion, we will first discuss the role played by these overground workers. Then, we will discuss issues that the security agencies face in handling these overground workers. Further, we will take a look at steps that the security agencies have undertaken in order to reduce the menace of overground workers. Further, before concluding this discussion, we will also discuss measures that can be undertaken in order to further reduce the menace of overground workers in a part of Indian territory. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion by discussing the role which are played by these overground workers. Now, these overground workers, they play a critical role in establishing and furthering the terrorist activities in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. They do this by providing safe houses to militants who come from across the border from Pakistan. Further, these overground workers, they also help collect and launder funds that are then used to sustain terrorist activities in an Indian territory. Additionally, these overground workers, they also help build a false narrative, and this false narrative helps radicalize the misled youth in an Indian territory. Further, these overground workers, they instigate people against the state and its forces. And this instigation of local population, it demoralizes and discredits the security force of the state. Further, these overground workers, they help recruit local youth for joining the terrorist ranks. And this further creates instability in state of Jammu and Kashmir. Also, these overground workers, they help facilitate movement and arrange logistics for weapons as well as terrorists who come from across the line of control. Additionally, these overground workers, they also create hindrances in conduction of security operations. And this helps militants to hide from security forces as well as select targets for their terrorist activities. Now, after we have discussed the role which are played by these overground workers, let us discuss the issues that the security agencies face in handling these overground workers. The first issue that the security agencies face is that if they take extreme steps against these overground workers, it can further increase the amount of militancy in a state. As randomly booking youth who are suspected of overground working activities, it can completely eliminate an individual's chance to come back to society. And this, it provides an opportunity for terrorists for indoctrination. Further, such extreme steps, they have created a negative perception of the government. As government's operation towards these overground workers, it embeds a strong feeling in the local population, and they think that the state is acting against their particular interest. And this it further alienates the local population from the Indian political and security system. Also, the security agencies they are facing hurdles in order to track these overground workers, as these overground workers they are also capable of carrying out small strikes themselves, while they retain the capability to mix rapidly among the local population. This can be attributed by targeted killings in the state and the inability of security agencies to completely eliminate these targeted killings. Now, after we have discussed the issues in handling of these overground workers, let us discuss the steps that the central government as well as the administration of Jammu and Kashmir has taken in order to deal with these overground workers. Now, the first important measure that the security agencies have taken is that they have increased their interaction with the common public. This can be seen by Operation Sadbhavna, which is a unique humane initiative undertaken by the Indian Army in Jammu and Kashmir. It aims to address the aspiration of people who are affected by tourism, and it focuses on improving the overall core social indices of education, women, and youth empowerment, while it simultaneously thrusts on capacity building through implementation of community infrastructure and developmental projects. Further, in this regard, is the Mission Pehal of the year of 2021. And under this mission, the officers of Indian Army they conducted face-to-face interactions with many Kashmiri youths, which encouraged these youths to express their grievances and the reasons that they may have faced disturbances by the Indian state activities. Further, the government they have undertaken training and employment programs for youth of Jammu and Kashmir through schemes such as Himayat Yojana as well as Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana. Further, the security agencies they have also focused on sharing of intelligence inputs amongst them. And this is done on a real-time basis among all security forces who are operating in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Further, the security agencies they have intensified the area domination, and this was done primarily through Operation All Out in the year of 2017, in which the Indian Armed Forces it decided to eliminate militant networks, their overground support, as well as top militant commanders. Further, the government it also took refuge under the Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act, which enabled the government to prevent these overground workers from disrupting the peace and security of the state of Jammu and Kashmir. Further, the government has also intensified the tracking of terror fundings, and this was primarily done through two options. The first option was imposition of FATF regulation on Pakistan, where Pakistan was grey listed and it forced the Pakistani army to curtail the terror fundings in order to get out of this grey list. And the second was through NIA raids where the suspects of terror funding, their locations were raided upon as well as the suspects they were arrested by the NIA. Now, after we have discussed the steps that are taken to deal with overground workers, let us discuss the further measures that can be undertaken in order to control the menace of overground workers. The first measure in order to tackle overground workers, it requires a multi-agency effort through which there is a need for jointly mapping of overground workers, terrorists and anti-national elements so that a complete intelligence picture is generated which is in synchronization with the ground realities of the state. Further, the security agencies they need a youth engagement programs, and their youth engagement programs such as Mission Pehal they can be further widened to include addressing the sense of alienation and trust deficit among the local population. For instance, youth forums, they can be conducted as platforms for social, political as well as cultural issues, and they can be freely discussed among the state representatives as well as local population. Additionally, there's a need to evolve a long term de radicalization and a counter radicalization policy for Kashmir. And this would require a detailed exploration by subject experts, and it should be multidisciplinary in nature, which should also include religious scholars, experts in religion and politics, psychologists, educationists, and civil society members, as this will further reduce the sense of alienation among the youths in the state. Also, there's an imperative need for psychological as well as social rehabilitation, in addition with strategic communication, as it can change the mindset of local population and bring the misguided youth back into the mainstream. Further, there's a need to launch intelligence-based sting operation, which will enable the security agencies to gather proof of damaging activities, and it will help them expose the overground workers who are prevalent in the state. Also, the government of India, it needs to invest in artificial intelligence as well as other technologies such as data mining, so in order to go through social media content. And further, flagging of such content will reduce the extremist content that are prevalent in social media, as this extremist content, it is further used to radicalize the youth of this state. And hence, through a multi-agency effort which will help joint map the intelligence picture, increasing the youth engagement programs, a complete de-radicalization policy, a psychological and social rehabilitation, gathering proof against the overground workers, as well as going through social media in order to discourage extremist content is a way forward in order to tackle these overground workers in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. And tackling them effectively will further improve the security of the state post revocation of Article 370. This was all for today's discussion on overground workers in state of Jammu and Kashmir. Now moving on to the second article of the day, which also appeared on page 8 of today's Hindu newspaper. This article reports that the Supreme Court on Friday, it held that instances of hate speech would be prosecuted equally. Now, the issue of hate speech has emerged as one of the key challenges against maintenance of public order and social harmony in an Indian society. Further, it also highlights misuse of fundamental right of freedom of speech and expression. And hence, this makes it liable for the state to impose reasonable restriction on exercise of free speech in India. Now, this topic is important from GS paper 2 perspective, as the syllabus, it highlights Indian Constitution and its significant provision, and Article 19 is one of the significant provisions in Indian Constitution. Further, the issue of hate speech also appeared in mains of the year of 2014, where it asked us a question on what do you understand by the concept of freedom of speech and expression and coverage of hate speech in it. Further, important constitution provisions are also important from prelims perspective. As you can see, in the prelims of the year 2021, a question appeared on one's right to marry a person. And in this regard, our discussion on hate speech, it will first include the legislation as well as judicial pronouncements in context of hate speech. Further, we will also discuss issues that are related in handling of hate speech in India. Before concluding this discussion, we will also take a look at steps that can be undertaken in order to tackle the menace of hate speech in the country. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion with legislation and Supreme Court judgments in context of hate speech. Now, to first understand what is hate speech, we must first understand that there is no specific legal definition of hate speech in the country. And in this regard, The Law Commission, in its 267th report, it suggested a definition of hate speech, which meant hate speech is an incitement of hatred which is primarily against a group of persons who are defined in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, as well as religious belief. Now, there are few legislation in India that are formed in order to tackle hate speech. The first legislation in this regard comes from the Constitution of India, which highlights that Article 19 subsection 2 it gives all the citizens a right to freedom of speech. But this right it is subjected to reasonable restrictions for preserving the public order, decency as well as morality. Now, the second important legislation is the Indian Penal Code of the year of 1860, in which sections 153A, 153B, as well as 298, it deals with speech or words that could create mischief, outrage religious beliefs, or cause imputations to national integration. Further, the Representation of People Act of the year 1951, it consists of two important sections. The first is Section 8, which disqualifies a person from contesting an election in case he is convicted for indulging in acts which amounts illegitimate use of freedom of speech and expression. Whereas Section 128 3A and Section 125, it prohibits promotion of enmity on grounds of religion, race, caste, community or language in connection with election, and it categorizes these activities as corrupt electoral practices, thereby prohibiting such activities. The fourth important legislation in this regard is Protection of Civil Rights Act of the year of 1955, where Section 7 of this Act it penalizes the incitement and encouragement of untouchability through words which may be either spoken or written or through signs or by visible representation. Further, there are two important judicial pronouncements which are important in context of hate speech. The first pronouncement is that of State of Karnataka versus Praveen Togadia case of the year of 2004. In this case, the Supreme Court it held that the state or district authorities they were well within their rights to prohibit entry so that one does not make speeches which can create a public order issue. Also, the second case in this regard is that of Pravasi Bhalai Sangathan versus Union of India case of the year 2014. And in this case, the Supreme Court it laid down certain guidelines with regards to politicians who make inflammatory speeches. Hence, these legislations as well as judicial pronouncements they are important in determining hate speech in a country. Now, after we have discussed legislation, let us take a look at issues with regards to hate speech in a country. Now, there are several issues regarding hate speech. The first among them is that hate speech it fuels discrimination, marginalization, as well as unfair treatment by reinforcing stereotypes and prejudices. And these stereotypes and marginalization efforts they lead to social exclusion as well as denied opportunities for certain individuals or groups. Further, hate speech also affects the individual's overall psychological health as it induces stress, anxiety, depression, and damages self esteem of an individual. And this leads to decreased sense of self belongingness among an individual who is subjected to hate speech. Further, hate speech is also used to incite individuals and groups in order to commit targeted violence against certain individuals as well as communities. Now, after we have discussed critical issues in and around hate speech, let us discuss measures that can be undertaken in order to tackle the menace of hate speech. The first important suggestion in this regard it comes from Law Commission's 267th report. And this report, it proposed addition of two new sections to the Indian Penal Code. The first section is section 153C, as well as second is section 505A, and these sections, it will enable criminalization of hate speech specifically. Now similar proposals, they were also made by Besbarua committee as well as TK Vishwanathan committee. Further, in 2020, a committee was formed in order to reform criminal laws, and this committee, it will examine the issue in and around tackling of hate speech. Further, there's an inherent need to implement a robust code of conduct which is essential for media agencies like Twitter, YouTube, as well as Facebook, as it will enable effectively curbing of hate speech at the lowest level. Further, there's an inherent need to balance the exercise of freedom of speech and expression on one hand and countering the hate speech on another through a careful legislation. And hence, efforts should be made in order to enforce the legal provisions without suppressing the freedom of speech and expression. Hence, through a addition of section in Indian Penal Code, a robust code of conduct for media, as well as ensuring balance between freedom of speech and expression, as well as countering of hate speech, will further promote empathy, foster diversity, which will help the legal system of our country to combat hate speech, as it is important for fostering an inclusive and tolerant society. Now, this was all for today's discussion on hate speech. Now, moving on to the next article of the day, which appeared on page 11 of the Hindu newspaper. As per this article, Moody's Investor Service, which is a credit rating agency, it has reaffirmed India's rating with a stable outlook. And this is because India's economy is likely to grow rapidly by international standards. And Moody, it expects India's economic growth to outpace other G20 nations. Now, despite strengthening monetary and macro policy effectiveness, this rating agency has also flagged concerns. And this is because of political tensions in the state of Manipur. Now, the topic of credit rating agencies, it is important from GS Paper 3 perspective. As ratings by credit rating agencies, it helps India mobilize resources from both domestic as well as international market. Further, such rating, they also have implication on balance of payments. Hence, it is also important from mains perspective. As you can see from this PYQ of their 2015 on recent gold surge and its implication on balance of payments. Further, the topic of credit rating agencies, it was directly asked in the prelims of the year of 2022. Hence, in the scope of our today's discussion on credit rating agencies, we will first see what is a sovereign credit rating. Then, we will discuss the differing views between these credit rating agencies as well as the government on India's sovereign credit rating. Further, we will also discuss impact of poor credit rating of India, which is just above the speculation grade. And in the end, we will discuss a way forward so as to how the global rating standards needs to be improved further. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion by discussing what is a sovereign credit rating. Now, credit ratings, they are a forward-looking opinions which are given by these agencies, and it signifies the relative ability of a borrowing entity to meet its financial commitments. For example, the credit rating or credit worthiness of a borrower is determined by its credit rating. Now, sovereign credit ratings, it represents the objective and independent assessment of a country's or an independent sovereign's ability to meet its debt obligations. Hence, for example, India's credit rating, it signifies the government of India's ability to pay such loans which it has borrowed from foreign investors. Now you will ask, what is the basis of determination of such ratings? Now these ratings, they are based on country's overall economic as well as political stability, and it shows whether the country is financially stable or not. And if it is not stable, whether it presents high or low default risks. Now these credit ratings, they are generated from both publicly available data as well as confidential information which are given to these entities such as foreign currency reserves or capital market transparencies. Now based on these parameters, the ratings are specified into two specific grades. The first grade, it is called an investment grade, and the credit ratings which falls under this category, it signifies between high as well as moderate credit risk. The second grade in this regard is called a speculative grade, which signifies a higher level of default risk when compared to investment grade. And entities which falls under this kind of grading, they are under high risk of credit default. Now rating agencies, they also provide what is called a rating outlook. And this outlook, it indicates the potential for change in the rating, and it can be either stable, positive as well as negative. Now after we have discussed what is a sovereign credit rating, let us discuss what are the importance of such credit ratings. Now these credit ratings, they help government borrow money from global markets. And if a government, it has a high credit rating, it refers to its high ability to pay the money back to its borrowers. Further, good credit rating, it also helps a country attract foreign investment. As this credit rating, it indicates the country's worth as an investment destination. Also, these credit rating, they are also an important aspect which helps country determine its benchmarking from other countries, as it helps country assess their country's economic as well as political environment in comparison to its peer nations. Further, these credit ratings are also important from investors' point of view, as this, it highlights the risk that an entity has to face when it borrows a money to a sovereign entity, as it provides information on the level of risk involved with investing in a particular country, specifically related to political risks. Further, such ratings, they also help companies strategically plan their investments, as they can make decisions in terms of investment in one country or another. Now, after we have discussed this importance of credit rating agencies, let us discuss the issue that is in news currently. And this issue, it relates to differing views between rating agencies as well as the government. Now, let us first understand what are the rating agencies' perspective with respect to India. Now, these rating agencies in general, they have given India a lower rank. And this is due to these agencies feel that India is the most indebted emerging market in the world. Further, India has also witnessed a deteriorating fiscal position, which is highlighted by high fiscal deficit as well as revenue deficits in its budgetary calculations. Further, the budgetary support for its near-term growth outlook is low, and which is signified by lack of long-term fiscal consolidation policies. As India's fiscal consolidation policy, it has been delayed due to multiple reasons, the recent being the COVID pandemic. Further, rating agencies are also apprehensive of policy implementation challenges. As these challenges, it has led India witness a sustained period of low economic growth, and which gives India the little financial headroom to respond to potential economic shocks. However, Government of India is of a different opinion. It sees that the rating agencies are being unfair in giving India a lower investment rating, whereas Government of India, it wants a higher rating from these agencies. And this is because of multiple reasons. First, it is because India, it has a zero history of sovereign default. Additionally, India is also witnessing a high GDP growth rate, as well as the inflation trajectory has been stable when you compare it with other nations. On the other hand, India also witnessed a significant economic recovery post COVID-19 pandemic. Also, India has witnessed an improved financial stability of its financial institutions, which can be highlighted by decreasing NPA in both state and private sector banks. Also, India has a large number of foreign exchange reserves, and this is high when you compare it with India's sovereign debt. Additionally, since the period of 2014, India is also witnessing what you call a political stability. And this political stability has helped India improve in its ease of doing business, rule of law implementation, as well as reduce the amount of corruption in the country. Now, after we have discussed the differing views between rating agencies on one hand and government on the other, let us take a look at issues which might be related to low credit ratings by these agencies. Now, as India has low relative credit rating when you compare it with other countries, it brings with it several set of challenges. The first challenge is that it reduces the investors' confidence in Indian economy. As poor rating, they act as a sense of deterrence against investment in emerging and developing economies like India. Further, poor credit rating it also increases the borrowing costs of government. As the credit risk perception increases, it forces the emerging countries like India to offer greater interest on their securities, which help make government securities more attractive to potential investors. Further, lower credit rating it can also lead to increased financial market instability. As low credit rating, it brings along risks that can trigger market as many institutional investors who are invested in India, they will look to sell out these investments and take money outside the country. Further, low credit rating it also increases the risk of isolation from capital markets as poor credit ratings for sovereign debt entities like banks and corporates it will make harder for them to get loans at an attractive cost. Further, poor credit rating, they also have severe policy implications. As country's policy, it gets beholden to these credit ratings, and this reduces the amount of sovereignty a country exercises. Hence, the government is not free to consider its domestic growth and development with regards to political and economic responsibility. Now, after we have discussed the impact of poor credit ratings on an emerging market like India, let us discuss a way forward on how such global ratings should be more inclusive and fair in nature. Now, to make sovereign credit ratings globally more inclusive and fair, it requires several measures. The first among which is to improve the transparency in ratings as it will address concerns which are related to higher probability as well as higher size of downgrade of emerging countries like India when you compare it with other developed economies. Additionally, such global ratings they can also avoid being reactive for emerging countries and this will enable them to be free from any bias and subjectivity. Also, engaging emerging economies and their credit ratings to determine sovereign credit ratings will ensure that the methodology of credit rating determination it reflects of economic abilities as well as its willingness to pay external obligations. In the end, there's also requirement of proper scrutiny of these credit rating entities. For example, credit rating agencies of developed countries they gave positive credit rating to US at the time of 2007 and 08 and this it led to subprime crisis which led to a global economic depression. Also, such credit ratings they gave higher ratings to countries such as Greece, Portugal as well as Ireland. And despite good credit ratings, these countries they defaulted in their foreign exchange loans. And this signifies that the methodology followed by developed countries credit rating agencies they are not properly scrutinized. Hence, by improving transparency of credit rating regime, freeing them from bias and subjectivity, improving their methodology, and allowing them to undergo proper scrutiny is a substantial way forward in order to improve the sovereign credit ratings of emerging markets like India in particular. Now, this was all for today's discussion on sovereign credit ratings. Now, let us move to the last article of the day, which appeared on page 10 of today's Hindu newspaper. This article reports that over the period of 5.5 years, at least 25 students they have died by suicide, and this is because they were subjected to ragging in their institutions. And this news article, it highlights the fragile state of mental health of students in our country. Now, the subject of mental health is important from GS Paper 2 perspective, as it deals with issues relating to development and management of social sector services relating to health, education, and human resources. Further, specific areas of health they have been asked by UPSC before in mains exam, which is apparent from this PYQ of the year 2020 on geriatric and maternal healthcare. Further, the issue of health it also appeared in prelims of the year of 2022, which asked a question related to Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission. Hence, in the scope of our today's discussion on mental health, we will first take a brief overview of what is a mental health issue as well as challenges that are associated in identifying and dealing with mental health. Further, we will also discuss government initiatives in order to improve mental health of citizens of our country. Before concluding this discussion, we will also discuss what are the further measures that needs to be undertaken in order to improve mental health of citizens of our country. Hence, let us start off our today's discussion with determining what is mental health and its associated challenges. Now, WHO it defines mental health as a state of mental well-being in which people can cope up well with many stresses of their life. And this mental health it can help people to realize their own potential and enable them to function productively as well as fruitfully, and it will enable them to contribute to their communities. Now, it is estimated by WHO that the mental illness it accounts for about 15% of total diseases. And in ICMR research, it highlights that 1 out of 7 Indian they are suffering from a mental health concern. And this brings us the importance of mental health in our country. However, mental health it faces several challenges. The first challenge regarding to mental health is related to poor implementation of mental health services, as there is a high treatment gap for mental disorders which leads to poor evidence-based treatment. Further, there is a severe shortage of mental health personnel, as currently there are only about zero point 0.3 mental health personnel per lakh of Indian population, and this is even below the global average. Further, people in India they have a discriminatory attitude towards mental health, as mental health it is perceived of having low need. Further, people also have low knowledge with respect to mental health. Additionally, mental health also has a stigma attached to it, and hence people are afraid to get themselves treated for mental health illnesses. Also, there is a severe paucity of research on mental health in our country, and this includes lack of determination of risk factors which may lead to mental disorders. And this is further aggravated by lack of data on different types of mental illnesses. And this further leads to low coverage of mental health by government as well as private health sector. However, despite several challenges, Government of India it has brought about several initiatives for furthering mental health in our country. Let us take a look at these initiatives in the next slide. Now, the first initiative in this regard is the National Mental Health Program, which keeps in view the heavy burden and inadequacy of mental health care. Now, this program it has three components. First is treatment, The second is rehabilitation, whereas third component, it focuses on prevention as well as promotion of positive mental health. Additionally, the government also brought about National Mental Health Policy, which aims to promote mental health and enable recovery, which will lead to destigmatization as well as desegregation of mental health with other illnesses. Further, government also brought about Mental Healthcare Act of the year 2017, which promotes a right-based access to mental health services, which will enable people to protect their mental health, promote mental health initiative, as well as fulfill rights of persons to secure delivery of mental health care services. Also important in this regard is the Ayushman Bharat initiative, as it provides comprehensive primary health care as well as insurance coverage for non-communicable disease. And this also includes mental disorders. Hence, patients who are having mental problems, they are covered under Ayushman Bharat initiative. Now, despite government initiatives, there are several steps that can be undertaken in order to improve mental health care access and services in our country. Now, what are these steps? Let us take a look in the next slide. Now, the first measure for improving mental health care access and services, it relates to its integrated approach of healthcare services, which will enable the government and health service providers detect mental illnesses, treat them, and help manage the mental health of patients in a better manner. Also important is the role of communities and families in this regard, which further needs to be strengthened in order to promote the social infrastructure of a person's background. And this will substantially improve mental health of an individual. Further, there is a need for improvement in training of community health workers, as it will help improve provisioning of mental health services in a ground level. Further, there is a need for an urgent attention in a primary care, and this urgent attention will enable to prevent suicide cases in our communities. Also important in this regard is the role of telemedicine in our country, which provides remote access in inaccessible areas. And through this telemedicine initiative, mental health care services such as counseling as well as therapy sessions can be conducted over an online medium. Lastly, there is also need for promotion of yoga, as it focuses on complete physical as well as spiritual well-being of an individual. And through yoga, an individual can help improve his mental health in a better manner. Hence, through an integrated approach towards mental health, improving the role of communities and families, training of community health workers, giving attention to primary care, improving access to telemedicine, as well as promotion of yoga in our country can help improve the delivery and access of mental health services. Hence, this was all for today's discussion on mental health, and it also concludes today's edition of Daily News Simplified.